I'm fascinated by extreme natural hazards. What I really want to study is how people respond to the disasters and how prepared we are as a society. After the disaster happens, I go out on the field and primarily learn how people reacted just before the disaster, during the disaster, and afterwards. That way, one can help build more resilient communities. I think when it comes down to the LA fires, the number one reason that we had so much devastation was the extreme wind. We had winds gusting up to 100 miles per hour, while in fact, in the past, we've had winds that were about half that size. You cannot have aerial support, you cannot have firefighting aircraft to help the ground forces. The second aspect was where people live. People live inside canyons, there are narrow roads at the top of the canyons. It's very, very difficult to get fire trucks out there.
This was going to end up being a scenario where we've got to go in and search every burned structure really for potential victims that didn't get out in time, didn't get the warning, chose not to evacuate, maybe couldn't evacuate because they didn't know about it yet. Fire came too fast to even get a warning to them. All those things that happened were going on down here. Our attention is really quickly turning into preparing for the mud and debris flows that will inevitably face us in the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire.
So what we're doing is we're looking for heavy metals and volatile organic compounds. All of this is from the tires. This is the steel belt of the tires. The rims have melted and all you have is the steel. So this is what keeps the rubber in place as you go. So this doesn't burn. Aluminum burns at about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. So this was one indication of, the temperature was at least 1200 degrees.
I don't think here we have ever gone through the exercise of actually opening up 50, 70, 100 hydrants simultaneously and checking to see in different parts of the city what is the pressure variation, how is the entire system is going to respond to this huge need for water all at the same time. If people had thought about looking what is the worst that could happen, then they would have been led to actually say, hey, do we have enough resources? Do we have enough water? Do we have enough fire trucks? Do we have enough firefighting aircraft? Why is it that some houses burn and others don't? We do have the technology as we speak that we can have houses that are extremely resilient to fires. And we saw this in Hawaii last year, the Lahaina fire. The entire Lahaina is burnt except a single structure that's sitting out there. It's a 100-year-old structure, it's a wooden structure, but it was recently brought up to code, I think about a year or two before the fire, and it survived unscathed, completely unscathed. So we do have the technology. Just like we do have the technology to have incredibly good fire models and look at the spread of the fire and to be able to make reasonable decisions. The question is why we're not using the technology, and this is something we need to address. One of the most difficult parts after a disaster, you can throw a lot of money to rebuild houses, but rebuilding, the sense of community. Do the planning changes necessary so that the community is more resilient, physically resilient in terms of resistance to disasters, but at the same time resilient in terms of keeping the sense of community and keeping all the interpersonal relationships that were there before based on how close to each other people lived. Where the doctor is, where the market is, where the hairdresser is, where the cleaners are. We're all going to do our best to try to build a more resilient community.